Good evening and welcome to the second Jana Mackey Distinguished Lecture. I'm Jonathan Earle, and for the next week or so, I'm the Associate Director here at the Dole Institute. I was also extremely blessed to know a brilliant and fabulous young woman, an activist named Jana Mackey, and I think it's fitting and appropriate that we are all here this evening because of her. She wasn't here very long, but as you can see, she touched an extremely large number of lives. Many of you were here last year as we kicked off the series with National Organization for Women President Kim Gandy. I can't think of a better person to follow Ms. Gandy than our second distinguished Jana Mackey lecturer, who will be formally introduced by the woman to my right in a few minutes. Suffice to say that she made a lot of friends during her first visit to the Institute here 3 years ago, and that her inspiring, whip-smart columns about social justice, the wrongly incarcerated, and women's issues make her one of the most exciting opinion writers out there. I may be the host this evening, but the real credit for this amazing and distinguished lecture series goes to my good friend Kathy Rose-Mockery, the program director of the Emily Taylor Women's Resource Center. If you don't know her, Kathy is a true force of nature, and it's our great fortune we were able to steal her away from Southern California. Kathy.
Well, believe it or not, Jonathan actually left me speechless, which is unusual for me. And I will repay the compliment because we are so fortunate to have Jonathan at the Dole Institute that he will be missed dearly. I'm sure you all agree. Well, it's an honor to follow Jonathan and kick off this very exciting lecture series again this year. Jana affected and inspired so many of us. I remember the shock and the profound sadness I felt when I first heard of Jana's death. And I remember sitting at the computer, the note popped up, and just sitting there looking at the screen, dumbfounded, unbelieving, thoughts swirling in my head, not only how can this be, this can't be real, but when I moved past those thoughts, what do we do? How do we respond to this? One amazing KU woman and a friend of Jana's, I think, thought the same thing, but she moved forward, Jana style, to do something. Liz Stewie, I promised I wasn't going to do this again. Liz Stewie, who is with us tonight and was not here last year to join us, sent a mass email to many members of the campus community with a call to action. Out of Liz's call to action came this lecture. I'd like Liz to stand. This lecture series was created to generate important dialogue about gender equity and call all of us to action. While conversation is a good starting place, it's essential we not stop there and that we all carry the torch and in the spirit of service, as the saying goes, walk the walk. That's part of what tonight is all about. We encourage you to thoughtfully consider this evening, inspired by Connie's words, and they will be inspiring, to say to yourself, how can I make a difference? How can I pick up the torch? Well, I don't need to remind everybody that Jana was a remarkable young woman. I remember an early encounter with her. I am the advisor to the Commission on the Status of Women, a fabulous student organization. Many members are in this audience. We were discussing Sexual Assault Awareness Week activities. Some of the students in the group weren't sure what direction they were going to take and what they wanted to do. Not Jana. Jana had ideas. She had lots of ideas. And she knew what needed to be done. And she said so. She said very directly. She spoke from the heart, which is why our presenter tonight is so relevant and so real to who Jana was. I want to take a minute to let you know that this was really a collaborative effort. And I just want to make a brief mention that Jana was a collaborator, and it's only fitting that this lecture is a collaboration among many, many units, among students, among faculty, among campus units, among community units. And it's important to recognize the labor of love for all of the people involved in making tonight happen. I would also like to thank my staff, who are a tremendous source of support. As we move forward, though, it's important to bring two remarkable people to the podium. Jana's parents, Christy and Kurt Brungart. Hard to know where to begin to describe them. I think 3 sentences won't do it, but I'll try to summarize. These are two remarkable people who are inspiring and remarkable role models. It's no surprise where Jana got her courage, her dedication, her drive, her commitment. There they are, role models, right here. They have my deepest admiration, and we are so fortunate to have them help us this evening to keep Jana's memory alive. Both Christy and Kurt teach at Fort Hays State University. Christy is an instructor for leadership studies, and I'm happy to report just received her doctorate. Kurt is the Voss Distinguished Professor of Leadership Studies and Director of the Center for Civic Leadership. I'd like to bring them forward.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you all for being here. Recently, someone asked me why I thought this speaker series was important. And of course, the first reason is because it honors my daughter, someone I miss with my entire being. But the second reason is I believe this speaker series can be and will be a catalyst to inspire more Janas. Tonight I'm going to read you something, and these are actually Jana's own words, that shows she was just a regular person, just like you and me, people who truly can make a difference in the world. As I read Jana's words, I would like for you to listen for those intersections between Jana's life and the title of Connie's message and the message she's bringing us tonight. Those words such as gender and justice and advocacy. Further, I would like for you to look for those intersections between Jana's life and your own lives. This essay that I'm about to read you parts of, Jana wrote in the fall of 2006. She wrote this just before she started law school at the KU School of Law, when she was 24 years old. When she died, she was 25 years old. These are Jana's words. I spent the first 20 years of my life counting the days until I could get out of Kansas. As an aspiring singer and actor growing up in Hays, there was never a doubt in my mind that my home state had little to offer me but in-state tuition. After that, it would be goodbye dirt roads and hello subways. If someone had told me that I would find my niche not only in Kansas, but in Kansas politics, I would have laughed out loud. Well, it turned out that as much as I loved performing, I was simply not driven to study either singing nor acting professionally. Moreover, I was utterly unprepared for the intimidation factor. At that point, my response was fear, especially the fear of not being good enough. I had learned to feign indifference. By my 4th semester of not trying and hardly caring, I was ready to leave college. Not the outcome expected of someone who started KU in the honors program and with many scholarships. Before it came to that, however, a fortunate coincidence of scheduling and general education requirements had me enrolled in women's studies and interdisciplinary introduction. Within a few weeks, I remembered what it felt like to be fascinated and eager. Before the semester was through, my major had changed to women's studies. Soon, I began volunteering at the Rape Victim Survivor Services and became very involved in organizing, mostly through my local National Organization for Women chapter. By graduation, I had a lot of experience and even more passion, but no idea of what job to pursue. Shortly after graduation, the field director for Nancy Boyda's congressional campaign called. Someone had recommended me for a field position. With no campaign experience whatsoever, I started the next month as the volunteer coordinator for the Shawnee County campaign office. After a week or so of waiting for someone to explain to me what to do and how to do it, I realized that was not going to happen. I was going to have to figure it out for myself. That July was a turning point for me. I was tempted to retreat and hide behind inactivity as I had so many times. As it turned out, what had been missing back then was a goal more important than proving myself. Having an actual purpose suddenly made my fears and inhibitions totally irrelevant. I set out immediately to learn and do everything possible in order to advance the campaign. By the primary election 1 month later, I had recruited volunteers, developed literature for phone banks and canvassing, and organized a Get Out the Vote effort in Shawnee County. After being promoted to deputy field director, I took on the responsibility of training the volunteer coordinators in the 4 other district offices and overseeing their progress. Although the race did not turn out as we had hoped, significant progress was made that fall. The district was organized and mobilized like never before, and I came out feeling empowered in a whole new way. My newfound confidence proved invaluable when I was recruited to serve as the interim director of Kansas Now, a position that entailed lobbying the Kansas legislature and developing a fundraising operation. I found myself once again with no experience or direction, but hit the ground running regardless. That year's legislative session was indeed a crash course in legislative procedure. I learned to track bills, developed persuasive materials, and presented both written and oral testimony before committees. More importantly, I built strong relationships with legislators and other lobbyists. Now collaborated extensively with the Pro-Can-Do Political Action Committee as well as the Kansas Equality Coalition, and the next year I contracted with all 3 organizations as a lobbyist. During the 05-06 legislative sessions, we defeated every opposition bill that arose, not an easy feat for organizations dealing with such volatile issues in Kansas. The skills I have developed over the past few legislative sessions have set me apart from my predecessors. We deal with issues about which people are very emotional, and it is my ability to reason, to persuade people using facts while respecting their beliefs, that has made me a successful lobbyist. Through logic and understanding, I have been able to build relationships and secure votes with legislators that many considered unreachable. Furthermore, I have garnered respect by finding innovative ways to neutralize bills that would otherwise put legislators in difficult positions. I find ways to diffuse potentially explosive bills by deleting a phrase or adding a few words so that we can avoid harmful legislation without angering constituents. The road has been long, but I have found my passion, learned to turn challenges into motivation, and discovered areas for which I excel. A legal education is the next step to being a more effective advocate for women. I have seen that change in Kansas is possible, and I will continue to use my unique perspective to work toward that right here in Kansas, the state I once swore to flee. Now, in Jana's mom's words, Kurt and I would ask all of you to please continue Jana's important work. Kurt has a few words he would like to say about some of the work we've been doing.
Thank you, Christy. It is true, hours after Jana's death, Christy and I talked about the importance of continuing her work of protecting women and protecting women's rights. On July 3rd, 2008, at Jana's funeral, I asked that day the 1,100 people in attendance to carry on Jana's work. I ask you to do the same. That day, at her funeral, I said, let's make sure that one fallen torch is now 1,100 torches. We set out a few days later to try to document 1,100 stories of service on behalf of Jana. On October 12th of this past year, we reached our goal. Service of volunteerism around the state, or around the country, 19 states and 4 foreign countries registered their service on behalf of Jana. What pleased us most is that the overwhelming majority of that service related to women's rights and reducing violence against women. Christy and I now have decided to narrow our focus to issues very important to Jana, especially violence against women. On December 10th of last year, we have created and announced the creation of Jana's campaign to stop domestic violence. We believe it is our personal responsibility to use the story of Jana's life, and even more importantly, the story of Jana's death, to reduce violence against women. Our goal is very simple. We ever so slightly want to alter the course of history. Our work has focused on public awareness, education, and public policy. We have literally given dozens of presentations throughout Kansas, throughout this country, and even overseas. On a request from the Attorney General, Christy and I chair the Kansas Domestic Violence Matters Intervention Program, where we're working hard to make sure we have certified treatment programs for offenders. I serve on the board of directors of one of the greatest organizations in the state, the Kansas Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. Last night, we spent hours in our hometown working to improve sexual assault response for rural Kansas. That is a battle, and we're making progress in Jana's hometown. And most recently, we have lobbied and helped spearhead the new domestic violence tag legislation, the most comprehensive legislation related to domestic violence ever passed in the state of Kansas. And very few states in this country have anything like it. All we are doing is telling Jana's story, and it is moving people. Thus, Jana is still changing the world. Thank you very much.
And now for the main event, Connie Schultz. We are so thrilled to have as our speaker this year, Connie Schultz. Not only is she an accomplished journalist, she is a stellar human being. Connie is an Ohio native, attended the Cleveland Marshall College of Law and Cleveland State University, received her journalism degree from Kent State University. She is a nationally syndicated columnist with the Plain Dealer newspaper, writing on issues related to women, equality, human rights, and social justice. She received the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 2005 and was also a Pulitzer Prize finalist in feature writing in 2003. Not bad. She writes for numerous other publications, including the online political blog, The Huffington Post. Her other awards include the Scripps Harvard National Journalism Award, the National Headliners Award, the James Batten Medal, and the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Social Justice Reporting. Her other awards include this, you think? I don't know. She is currently married to Senator Sherrod Brown. Married to Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, has one daughter and a stepson with her former husband and 2 stepdaughters with her current husband. Her first book, Life Happens and Other Unavoidable Truths, is a collection of her previously published columns. I'm dying to get it. And was printed in 2006. Her second book, this is the title, And His Lovely Wife, a memoir from the woman beside the man, is a journal of her experiences on the campaign trail with her husband. It was released in 2007 and was actually, we did a book signing here in the Dole Institute. So please join me in welcoming Connie Schultz.
Thank you, Kathy. Well, I see Kathy's been looking at Wikipedia, so I got to make a couple corrections here. I attended law school, but I dropped out and married my professor. Please, young ladies, do not do that. And I only wrote 4 pieces for Huffington Post in '06. Not that there's anything wrong with Huffington Post, but I haven't been doing that lately. But I always feel the need to make sure everybody knows I didn't complete law school, because I don't want to see that blog entry, okay? Connie Schultz is lying about her past. It is so great to be back here. Thank you for the invitation to return. I'm going to have my phone here, not because I'm expecting a call, but watches keep dying on me lately. So I'm using my cell phone to keep track of the time so that we make sure that we leave time for questions. I am honored to be here under these circumstances. I had this invitation came my way several months ago, and I actually changed a commitment so that I could do it for several reasons. The other correction to Wikipedia is he may have been my stepson when I first met Andy, but by the age of 6 I was raising him full time, and he is my son. And the way Sharon and I always say it is we have 1 son and 3 daughters, and our 3 daughters are all in their 20s. And so, and Jana was a feminist from the Midwest, and I know what that feels like. But most importantly, you are right that the work she's been doing, Christy and Kurt, should be continued. And I really want to start this by simply saying I am so sorry you lost your daughter. It's only been not quite 2 years yet. Grief sneaks up on you. And 2 years is a very short period of time to live with somebody who made such a difference in your life. And I am mindful of what you said, Christy, when I had a chance to sit with Kurt and Christy for a while today and talk to them before the speech tonight. It was one of the things I had asked for, and you were very nice to accommodate me that way. And I asked the question that, I always want to ask, especially when it's a young woman from the Midwest. I said, how did Jana become such a feminist? And Christy said to me, I didn't raise her to be a feminist. She raised me to be a feminist. And you were so humble about that. And you said she became a feminist without the support of her mom, because you said you had grown up in a much more conservative, traditional. I think you've gotten over that little hurdle, Christy. Because I sure wouldn't have guessed that if you hadn't told me. One of the other things you told me about Jana is that she tended to hang out with the kids who were ridiculed and ostracized when she was younger. And she told you, I'd rather be right than popular. And I'd love that bumper sticker. I think that's a great way to go about it. So that's why I'm here, because of your daughter and because of the work you're doing. And I don't even for a moment, I can't say to you I can't imagine what it would be like to lose one of my child. I can imagine only too readily, and what I say to you is I don't want to. But you've forced me to think about it. And I really appreciate that, because it's why I'm here. I was talking to Sarah Turwelp earlier today. She picked me up at the airport and was driving me, and she said that Jana was the kind of kid who, don't tell me I can't, because I will. And I thought I would love to add that, and please tell me I can't, because then I must. I really understand that piece. And it reminded me of 2 quotes from the African-American poet Lucille Clifton that I have kept, that's taped to the mainframe of both my desktop computers, and I've had it there for years. What they call you is one thing. What you answer to is something else. What they call you is one thing. What you answer to is something else. And I suspect there are few people in this room, particularly the women among us, who can't identify with that pretty quickly. And I have it because I really know what it's like to have someone tell you what you can't do, including write a column for years and years. And this isn't about me, and I don't need to go into a lot of that, but I think it's really important that we keep in mind always that you will always meet people who will tell you what usually what you aren't capable of doing. And if Jana stood for anything, it was that we're just going to skip right past that little opinion of yours and move ahead. And I like that about her. And she also, you can tell it from the photos you see of her, I see it in so many of the stories about her, that Jana had such a sense of humor. And, we feminists fool men that way all the time. I always say when men want to say, you don't have a sense of humor, I said, no, you have no idea how much we're laughing at you. We have a great sense of humor. And I love what I read about Jenna. She found kindred spirits who believed in good beer, good life, and making a difference. And I think that is the perfect combination. But I think it's really important. We are here because of a somber event. But we are here to celebrate a life that was so full of joy and hope and willful determination. And it is important to keep our sense of humor. I know a little bit about why that might matter. I mean, Rush Limbaugh, for example, does not like me. And sometimes he goes off on me in his show. And you can always tell when that's happening because all of a sudden you get 340 emails that sound exactly alike because the lemmings do have to jump that cliff. And they tend to mention Rush, and you just know it's only a couple of hours before Media Matters is going to post exactly what he said about you. And they're going to defend you. And I finally figured out, it used to bug me because he would call me a blitheringly ignorant, and he'd call me a ditz, and I thought, oh, I know what's going on here. I know what column I need to write. Because, my mom said when boys start calling you names, it's because they have a crush on you. And, he didn't like that at all. And I thought every time I make him lose his temper, I win. And it's, when you're a columnist and you're a feminist in the Midwest and you're writing these columns, you will get calls that you don't expect sometimes. And I was just telling a few people today, a couple of months ago, I was sitting at my desk, and this guy calls me up, and he starts yelling, if you were my wife, I'd castrate myself. And I said, well, that wouldn't take long now, would it? And you just learn over time that the last thing you want to do is engage at their level. And it's instructive when you get a nasty call, and it's instructive when you're doing the biggest battles of your life. That it's not that anything's a joke, but that it's really important that you keep a sense of humor because nothing will disarm them like your ability to laugh and your ability to smile even when they're trying to take you down. Kurt, I keep thinking about something you said to me today. You said, Jana didn't die, she didn't pass away, Jana was murdered. And that is, of course, the crux of this issue, that she was a victim of the very crime she was trying to prevent. And so that means to us, what do we take from that? Well, we can say, yes, this is a tragedy because it is, and life will bring you to your knees. As we know, we all will have those moments if we have not already, but some moments are way harder than the next. And what happens, what brings you back up, what makes you stand, and who you are after that, it will make all the difference. I admire you so much for being able to do this. I tell you honestly, I don't know that I could, but I understand why you do. You told me within 6 hours after she had died, her friends were saying to you, what do we do? What should we do? What can we do? Kathy mentioned that. Your feeling was right away, what can we do about this? Talk about embodying the lessons that Jana presented in her life on a daily basis. So the single question of what can we do is the reason we're here today. It's the reason it's become your life's work in so many ways. And it's why Kathy, you care. Kathy, by the way, she is a dynamo. And I had such a good time talking to her at lunch. She loves every young woman she meets here. Her heart is so big, and I love coming to universities where the people who are in charge of hurting the students and teaching the students all like them so much. That's really a nice thing. And we can't bring Jana back, can we? That question cannot bring her back. She has gone to us. But we can prevent her dream from dying. And that sounds a little too fancy, because what we really mean is, that's not enough. No matter what we do now will not be enough, because nothing can bring her back. But it's something. And if we do it right, it's a lot. I'm thinking a lot today, as I've been talking to all these different women, I've been thinking about my mother. Now, my mom, I come from, some of you who know me a little bit know that I come from a working class, and I was the first in my family to go to college. And I grew up in a little working class town called Ashtabula, Ohio. It's just about an hour east from Cleveland. It's right on Lake Erie. And my mom was she was 4'11", and she used to have a beehive because she thought it made her look taller. And it didn't, but she thought it did. And she was really fancy with it. Like at Easter, she'd have it done in an Easter basket with little eggs, nests, and stuff. She knew how to do that hair. So, and the thing about my mom, she was a hospice home care worker. And the joke about my mom is when Janie showed up, people lived longer, because she wanted to hear other people's stories. And, it's so easy for me to tell the fun stories about my mom, because I think about, she was so short. One summer, I always played softball. And one summer, my mother decided we were going to play together on a co-ed team, because she had always wanted to play softball too. Well, because she was so short and she had this giant hair and she wore pedal pushers, nobody could find her strike zone. So she was always walking to first base. But what she wanted to do was slide. So she would always, whenever possible, slide into home plate. And her whole hair would just shift to the side. And then she would take one big swat, pop it right back up. And then she'd point to all the cheering ladies and say, Aquanet. So that was my mother. And my mother raised her 3 daughters. She constantly is telling us, don't marry him until you see how he treats the waitress. And of course, we understand what she was saying. How we treat those we're allowed to mistreat is a measure of who we are. And she often told us that in large part because she and my father both were people who were allowed to be mistreated. Like on their jobs, how they navigated the world. They were kids we couldn't play with because we lived on the wrong side of the tracks. And so she didn't want us to turn into the kind of people who made her feel so lousy, frankly, is what it boiled down to. But she also, the sadder side about my mom and her story, and of course she died young, she was 62 when she died. She died of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, they thought, but the more we looked into it, it's probably from washing my dad's clothes with asbestos all those years. And she died young. And she would always say to me as I was getting older, and she would often say, we don't know where Connie came from. We gave birth to her, but we don't know where she came from. Because I just was different in that way. It sounds a lot like Jana. My mom said, I'll never forget when Marilyn French's book came out, The Women's Room, Women My Age. Do you remember that book? I'm in college, and I'm reading that book, and I said, oh, I think my mom needs to read this book. So I mailed her a copy. I said, Mom, I think you're going to really like it. It's coming, it's real feminist. My dad calls me a week later and says, what the hell's that book you gave your mother? And I said, what? He said, she threw it at my head. So I called my mom, and I said, Ma, what'd you hit Dad with the book for? And she says, well, I was sitting there, and I was reading this book, and I started thinking about all the things he's done and all the things I put up. And he was sitting watching a game on TV, and she all of a sudden just went, hit him right in the head. But part of the reason for that is because she did put up with a lot. And my dad was a large and angry man. I loved him, but he was a difficult man. He was a hard man. And she used to say to me so often, I want you to be braver than I am. And I want you to speak out, and I want you to say the things that are on your mind. I don't want you to be scared like me. And I've never forgotten that because in large part I'm who I am because my mom wanted me to be different from who she was. And I'll never forget about 6 months before she died, I was taking her to a doctor's appointment. And I just wrote about this recently. And she reached over and she touched my hand and she said, you're so much stronger than I was. You're so much braver. And I said, Mom, I'm braver because of you. And she just looked at me and her eyes welled up. She goes, really? And I said, yes, I listened to you. But she never had the kind of confidence that would have ever made her believe that she could do this, for example, even though I'm sure she could have. So I'm very mindful of the legacy that I inherited. And it wasn't just the legacy of bigger hopes and dreams, it was the legacy of fear that came from some of the women who passed along what they knew and hoped that I would leave them behind, frankly, is basically what their dream was. And I'm sure I'm not the only one here who thinks that. But now, as I'm 52, almost 53, and so I'm starting to think a lot more about legacy in a different way. And, if my success of that long list of awards you rattled off, if that's all that I accomplish in my life, then my success dies with me. And I have left nothing behind. And I've been having a lot of pretty troubling conversations with younger women who feel that we're not being supportive of them in the way that we could and that we're not mentoring in the way we ought to, that they have new ideas, new ways to use social media, for example, and we can shoot them down. And I'm talking about feminists. And I've seen a lot of this firsthand in Ohio recently, and it's breaking my heart because we have a primary race, a Democratic primary for Senate. It's an open seat. And one of the candidates is the Secretary of State, who is a woman, and another candidate is the current Attorney General, or Lieutenant Governor, who is a longtime progressive. And these girls, these young women, are doing exactly what we raised them to do. They're making up their own minds. But in doing so, not all of them, a good number of them, are not supporting the woman candidate. And they are really getting attacked for this. by women my age and older, and I encountered it firsthand over the weekend when I was in Cincinnati at a pancake breakfast. And a group of these women, fellow feminists, a lot of them my age, a little bit older, came up and they all had this woman's pin on, and I've taken no position in the race. I've made it very clear, as is my husband, we're not going to endorse in this race. We're just staying out of it. And they were very angry about that. And they got angrier when I said, I don't like what I'm hearing from a lot of the young women, especially the young feminists among us. I don't like this message we're giving them that they can't support anybody but her. And I cannot tell you what it feels like to be almost 53 years old and be on the receiving end of a lecture about what it means to be a feminist. So I went home, and I do Facebook, because my kids did not want me to. Do you know our youngest daughter would not friend me for a year? And she kept reminding me, excuse me, Mom, the entire time I was in high school, you would say, I'm not here to be your friend. I'm here to be your mother. But she finally friended me, and then I couldn't post for forever on her wall. I didn't know you could do that, where you can't post. Anyway. So I'm on Facebook. Part of it's to prove that you can have identities and have very spirited discussions still, as opposed to the anonymous comments online. I am a woman with multiple agendas at any given moment, and that's one of them. But I got home and I went on Facebook. I have about 2,200 people there right now on Facebook, and I said, Connie Schultz would like to remind some Ohio activists that feminists can vote for the guy and not be betrayers to the cause. Well, I just love to poke the bear. But the comments that got listed were pretty interesting. Most behaving, but some getting cut. But what broke my heart were the private emails I was getting in response to the status update. And they were mostly from young women. I remember 2 of them writing saying, I am crying as I write this. And one who's had a very long relationship with a very well-known feminist in our area, who was there when her triplets were born, who was there at grandparents' day, is no longer speaking to her. And I've been on the receiving end of one of those temper tantrums from this person. And here's the thing. First of all, I'd like to think we learned something from the 2008 presidential Democratic primary. I was an ardent supporter for Hillary Rodham Clinton, in part because she'd been so personally supportive of me. In 2006, when my husband won the Senate race, they're all calling. Barack Obama's calling. John Edwards is calling. Joe Biden. That was a long conversation, because they always are. And then, I love him, but he does go on. And the only person who did this was Hillary Clinton when she called, and the first words out of her mouth were, shared congratulations. And the second thing she said was, please tell Connie not to let anyone tell her she can't have this career. I think she knew a little bit about what she was talking about there. But I'll never, if I had based my friendships in 2008 on who among my friends were willing to support Hillary Clinton, I would have been a very lonely person by the end of it, because a lot of women wanted to support Barack Obama. And there's nothing, including 2 of our daughters. And I'll never forget standing in the kitchen and saying to our daughters at one point, because you know how these kids, you young women, you insist on teaching us and teaching us. And I said to them, I don't understand how you can be feminists and not support Hillary Clinton. And my daughter said, Mom, we already get the strong woman part. She looked very weary at that moment. She says, I was raised by one, and you raised me to make up my own mind. And it really stuck with me. And she was right about that. And it was the same with my friends, some of whom surprised me. But I had nothing against Barack Obama. He had been in the state a lot to campaign for Sherrod. I knew all of these people. And it really helped me remember the most important message of feminism. It is all about choice. On every issue, it's about choice. And I don't want to discourage that. And I'm a little disheartened to think perhaps we didn't learn that lesson, at least in Ohio. Because here's the thing. At my age, you have to concede the point. You young women I don't have your midriff, you don't have my wisdom. And apparently there is a trade-off involved. So there's no point in my being bitter that I'm no longer as young as you. It is your time, it is your day. There is just no point to this. However, do not think that you don't have anything left to learn. That's why I'm here. And that's why women like me are here. But we need some guidance from you. My concern is that all those private emails weren't being said publicly. And I want you to learn to speak out. If we women wait for the invitation, very very important things never happen. I'm reminded of a scene in my own newsroom back in when I was probably 2002, 2003. And a good friend of mine, who's one of the few at that point women city editors on the desk, we all assistant city editors, and she looks so upset. And I walk over to her and I said, "What's the matter?" And she points to all her male colleagues who are huddled, talking. And she said, "I'm trying to figure out why I'm not being included in that discussion." And I put my hand on her back and said as gently as I could, "I'm trying to figure out why you're waiting for the invitation. Because if we had waited for the invitation, we would not have the right to vote." And I want to remind us of why we have the right to vote. It was a bunch of men who thought we should have the right to vote after an awful lot of work by women. So it's really important to remember that we always are better in a group. I'm thinking of what my husband's mother said when she was dying a year ago this February, and we were taking care of her at hospice. And Emily Campbell Brown was from Georgia, and she never lost her accent. She moved from Mansfield, Georgia to Mansfield, Ohio. And she was the only person who could turn my name into 8 syllables. You know, Connie. But when she was dying, she at one point turned to Sharon and she says, "Sharon, I would so love to hear one of the songs from our Lutheran hymnal." And dutiful youngest son that he is, he went into the family library and brought out the hymnal and sang Merciful Savior, I think it's called. He did 3 verses. And I watched him leaning over his mother's bed, and we had a hospice bed set up for her in the living room. And some of you may have heard my husband on TV. You've heard him speak. He talks like this, and he sings like this. And it was wonderful to watch and very touching. And the next day she said to him, "You know, Sharon, I wish that Janine was here." It was one of their friends who's a beautiful singer. "I'd love for her to sing to me." And he said, "Well, Mother, you know, I did sing to you yesterday, 3 verses." And she says, "Yes, I know, honey. You're better in a group." Teaching right up to the end. But the point is we all are better in a group. And that's something I don't want us to lose sight of, because that's what Jana was about. I love hearing all the stories. All these stories about her were about organizing. And I was raised in a union family. We had the Jack and Jesus wall, Jack Kennedy and Jesus on the same wall in the living room. So, and the whole note, my dad was a union organizer, and the idea was, you know, when you are individuals without power, the only way you get power is to organize and to stand shoulder to shoulder and say, we will not move. And this is our day, and this is our time. So I really get that. And I want to remind us of who did that before us, for us as women. And so I just want to read a little bit of a passage. I wrote this several years ago. And I went and looked at a lot of court transcripts to get it right. So I want to tell you about the women who went before us. The women were innocent and defenseless, and by the end of the night, they were barely alive. 40 prison guards, wielding clubs in their warden's blessing, went on a rampage against the 33 women wrongly convicted of, quote, obstructing sidewalk traffic. They beat Lucy Byrne. They chained her hands to the cell bars above her head and left her hanging for the night, bleeding and gasping for air. They hurled Dora Lewis into a dark cell, smashed her head against an iron bed, and knocked her out cold. Her cellmate, Alice Kosu, thought Lewis was dead and suffered a heart attack. Additional affidavits describe the guards grabbing, dragging, beating, choking, slamming, pinching, twisting, and kicking the women. Thus unfolded the Night of Terror on November 15, 1917, when the warden at the Algonquin workhouse in Virginia ordered his guards to teach a lesson to the suffragettes in prison there because they dared to picket Woodrow Wilson's White House for the right to vote. For weeks, the women's only water came from an open pail. Their food, all of it colorless slop, was infested with worms. When one of the leaders, Alice Paul, embarked on a hunger strike, they tied her to a chair, forced a tube down her throat, and poured liquid into her until she vomited. She was tortured like this for weeks until word was smuggled out to the press. When I read that passage, when I think of what they went through, I imagine the ghosts of those women standing around me. And I've said this many times when I've talked about this, and I just imagine them looking out into the audience and saying, remember, please remember. Tonight, I think of the spirit of Jana. I think of how she has a noble invitation to join the women who went before us. And I think of how she would say, never forget. And so I'm here to tell you tonight, I look out in this room full of people, and particularly our young women, and I dare say that as long as the women in this room draw a breath, we will never forget Jana Mackey. Thank you. Now, thank you. Now, we've got some time for questions. And here's the plan. Am I correct that you're supposed to wait until somebody gets a microphone to you? Is that right? Oh, you know when I do this, I can see all of you. Much better. So let's have a conversation. We'd like to hear what's on your mind. I know that Christy and Kurt would like to hear. And any questions or comments? Let's start. And I hope some of you young women are going to participate. Don't make me call on you. Because I will. Nobody? What do you suppose this is about? What do you think we're afraid to talk about? There you go. There's one.
Connie, when you were here in 2007, you said something that resonated a lot with me. And that was something about how women your age and my mother's age are not used to strong women my age. And about climbing that ladder and what that means in the collective group wisdom that you talked about. Would you mind sharing that story with everyone?
You know what that immediately makes me think of is when my daughter was about 16, she was mouthing off all the time. And I remember at some point I just said, Kayla, I'm done listening to this. She goes, you know, Mom, you were the one who raised me to speak my mind. You're the one who said I should say what I want to say whenever I want to say it. And I said, not with me. And it was one of those crystallizing moments when you realize that she is turning into exactly what you had intended for her to be. When she was growing up, I was a single mom for 11 years. And the suffix to our phone number was always 1920, because that was the year women got the vote. And I would say to Caitlin, you know, Kate, when you give people the phone number, you should tell them that, remind them that, you imagine how that went. Oh, yeah, Mom, okay, I'm going to do that. Yeah, Mom. So one night, I was making a salad, and she was ordering a pizza, and she was, again, 16, that magical year. And I heard her giving the information for the order, and then she gives the number, and I know she knows I'm looking right at her. And she does that teenage thing. She said, that was the year women got the vote. And then I hear her say, you didn't know that? She says, how old are you? She says, are you registered to vote? And I went, yes! Tell me you don't want to hear about 1920. But the thing was, I also became aware of this other reality that at some point, Caitlin's going to feel like she should be taking over a lot of things that I was used to being in charge in. One of the things of when you are the generation who fought for a lot, as much as you say you want to carry as you climb, you have a very hard time giving it up. Giving up whatever power it is that you've earned. And especially if there aren't many of you. All I have to do is look in newsrooms. We finally have our first woman editor-in-chief. It was the first time in almost a 200-year history of the paper. Gail Collins, who, when she became editor of the editorial page in the New York Times, it was the first time in their newspaper's entire history. That was just a few years ago. So there aren't a lot of us in leadership sometimes that can feel, certainly of our age. And you can feel, first of all, you feel a little threatened, because if you're not used to being mentored, you're also not used to mentoring. And you're not quite sure how it works. I mean, I see this a lot in women my age and older, the anxiety of that. And so one of the things we're trying to create is a climate of acceptance that it doesn't mean you're giving up, and it doesn't mean you're giving in. It means that you are giving, and that you're trying to create a climate. I've always said I want to be a safe place for the people I love and the people who I care about. And that means friends and family, and now increasingly young women who need to talk about what's on their minds. And to be that safe place, I have got to quit seeing them as a threat to my status, a threat to, I'm never going to look like you again. I don't think I looked like any of you when I was your age, so I don't know quite what I'm going to. But it's not about that anyway. And we've had 2 daughters who've struggled with eating disorders. And they are both doing very well right now. But I can tell you, it is the most scary thing to deal with. And all you have to do is look around at this culture and what we do to our women. What we do to our women. And, of course, we're here to talk about domestic violence and what we do to our women. But let's also start about just the messages of self-loathing that we're communicating all the time. So it is important to carry as we climb. It's also important to, if we put a hand out, to grab it. You can't do it all on your own. I love that you think you can. I love especially that you feel so empowered when you're still in college, and then you get into the workforce, and you find out that it's not quite as much of a done deal as you might have thought. You are in the state of Kansas. Do I need to tell you what's going on in your state legislature right now on the issue of choice? And how about Oklahoma? As I said to a journalism class today, it's a gift that keeps on giving for a columnist. They are doing so many things that, to me, just resonate with misogyny towards women. And it was interesting to me how many women wanted to talk this week. I've been in the last 8 days, I've been at DePauw University, and I've been in South Bend, which was yesterday, and now I'm here. And so many young women care about what's happening in Arizona. And it was interesting to be in a journalism class just today on your campus when someone brought it up. Do you think, you're in Ohio, I know you're syndicated, but are you going to write about immigration? Do you care what's happening in Arizona? And I said, yeah, I care, because here's why. Because now you look like a Mexican. You look like a Mexican. And I just started pointing to anybody who had skin darker than mine. Every single one of them could potentially be stopped in Arizona now and have to prove their citizenship. That is not a man's issue or a women's issue. That is a patriot's issue. And this patriot says this is not what America stands for. And I want to see lots of women speaking out on that. The thing I always want for women is I want us to surprise them. They expect, people who don't want women weighing in, expect us to weigh in on the issue of abortion rights. They expect us to weigh in on the issue of health care. What they don't understand is that every issue is a woman's issue. So it's really important that whatever your issues are in this room, that you speak out on them. And I'm reminded of the activist Maggie Kuhn. She was the founder of the Gray Panthers, an advocacy group for senior citizens because they had none. It's hard to imagine now, but because they're pretty outspoken, but this is long before all that. It was in the early 70s. Maggie Kuhn said, speak your mind even if your voice shakes. Isn't that wonderful? Speak your mind even if your voice shakes. And I know there are any number of people in this room who think that they can't really start speaking out until they've had more education. Jennifer, you and I have talked about this before. Or once they get married and settle down, or once they get that new spouse and settle down, or get that graduate degree, or get those credentials. I say start where you are. And the thing that I've noticed, I've done many, many events where somebody gets up to ask a question, and it's clear that they're so nervous. He or she is so nervous because the voice is trembling. And you know what happens? The room gets so quiet and so respectful because everyone in the room knows that that person is nervous. So it must really matter to this person to get up and speak because it's so hard. So it's okay that your voice shakes. What isn't okay is that you silence your own voice. I think of what my mom used to say to us girls all the time. Girls, you're going to meet all kinds of people who want you to feel less than what you are and who are going to criticize you and constantly find your flaws. Try not to be one of them. Isn't that great? Try not to be one of them. What else is on your mind? Over here? I told you earlier, George, you had the coolest hair in the room of 30. You still have the coolest hair in the room.
Thanks. As a male feminist here on campus and in Lawrence, I've experienced enormous support, and people here have always really embraced that. But as early as this week, or as recently as this week, and as far back as I can remember as I've been involved in the women's movement, I've encountered a lot of negative criticism and a lot of feedback from other activists. And I was just curious where you, being a very involved activist, see men's place within the movement, and if you believe it's something that they should be involved with as a whole.
Don't sit down yet. Can you tell me, please, a little bit about the criticism you hear?
Well, I mean, the criticism you get a lot from men is that, my dad, for one, asked me if I'm a women's studies major because it helps me sleep with women and those kind of things. And you get a lot of that from the men who aren't as involved in the movement. But there have been other women within the movement. I'm not going to like name names, and it's not
Oh, no,
anybody
no,
that I know.
I'm not asking you
But
to.
they've asked, why are you involved? This is a women's movement. You're part of the patriarchy. Why are you involved in this? And there was a comment in one of my classes a while ago about how no woman can be safe as long as there's any men on the earth. And I
Well,
thought
that's okay.
Yeah.
Right.
and the generalization there is what bothered me. And I was just curious where you, having, you've traveled all over the country and you've been involved with various people who have been involved in various forms and factions of the feminist movement, see men and see their role in the movement as a whole.
I remember a couple of years ago, a guy got up after I'd given a talk, and he said, the problem with you feminists is you hate men. And I said, no, we just hate stupid men who make comments about women that are unacceptable. Being a feminist never meant trying to figure out who we could neglect, who we could betray, who we could ignore. And I am sorry that has happened to you. As I pointed out earlier tonight, we wouldn't have the right to vote if men had not supported our right to vote. And as John Lewis would tell you in a heartbeat, Congressman John Lewis from Georgia, will tell you in a heartbeat that civil rights could not have happened if Jews and lots of other white people hadn't stood shoulder to shoulder with them. And I mean, we always need somebody else. I do a lot of advocacy for gay and lesbian rights, in part because I know they need straight people to stand up for them, because we are all in this together. And one of the things we were talking about earlier in the journalism classes, it is such, for some reason, so often now, we want to immediately demonize someone we don't agree with, or someone that we're suspicious of, or someone who doesn't look or sound like us. And you spend 5 minutes with that person and actually start talking, the scary thing is you're going to find you have more in common than you want to think. That's also the most reassuring thing, is that we have more in common than we want to think. And you will always get, if you stand for anything, George, if you stand for anything, you will make enemies. You will have your critics. But the alternative is to be liked by everybody and stand for nothing. And I think then you end up not liking yourself very much. What I am grateful for is that men like you, men like Kurt, men like my husband, do stand for women. You stand up for women. And, I checked, before I would even go out with Sharon, we've only been married 6 years. And he was in the house when he first sent me a very suck-up email comparing me to Barbara Kingsolver. He denies that's a suck-up, but ladies, can I show of hands here? That was a suck-up, yeah. I looked up his votes on gay marriage and choice before I'd even go out with him. Because when you're in your 40s, there's just no point to coffee, if you know. So I had to be sure. And the thing that I've come to see over time, because I saw this on that Saturday, some of them were very angry at my husband for not stepping up for the woman candidate. And I just stopped in my tracks and said, wait. Are you going to suggest that he is not a progressive? He is not a feminist? Because it is hard to be on the receiving end of that. I'm sorry that happened to you. What I really appreciate is you showed up anyway. That's what changes minds. And it grows skin that you don't even know you need until you get out there. But having it early actually is a good thing in the long run. But it really feels pretty lousy right now, and I'm sorry that happened. I always love pointing out, I'm a feminist, and I iron my husband's shirts, and I pack his lunch. And I'll never forget when I first started dating Sharon, I wouldn't even let him make coffee for me. And I wrote about this in my first book because he finally sat me down, because I said, I can make my own coffee. And he says, Connie, letting me make your coffee does not mean you're giving up your rights to own property and to vote. And it was a real, okay, let's see how you make coffee. And he makes it for me all the time now. But we all need that reality check sometimes. We can get really dug in. And it's important to have people like you around us to remind us that we can get pretty extreme. I see a hand back there.
This is on. Oh, okay. I know as a young woman, a lot of women my age feel like feminism has already been achieved. And I have a friend who's going to law school next year, and she said, I don't understand what women are fighting for, because the law school I'm going to is 56% women. It's a majority. I responded, I, as an engineering student, have sat in classes with 67 students and 3 women. So my question is, as a feminist who's seen a lot of progression in our country, what do you feel are the areas where we still have the biggest gains to make, where women still lag significantly behind?
Well, I have 2 words for you. Stew pack. I could not believe how the Stupak Amendment almost derailed health care reform. And I could not believe all the hand-wringing, all the debating. I could not believe somebody in the gallery calling out when Stupak finally agreed to join the Democrats in the vote and called out baby killer. And he says, no, I meant the ones who are getting the abortions. Oh, thank you. That felt much better. Thank you. We're glad to know that. I don't understand young women thinking it's done. I really don't. I look at the numbers of women editors in my profession, and I know it's not done. I look at the legislation that's pending in Kansas. I look at the legislation that just passed in Oklahoma, over the veto of the governor in Oklahoma. I look at the mail I get from, in Ohio from all, and I look at, you know what else I look at? One of the things the reasons I oppose the anonymous comments on newspaper websites is it really invites the trolls, who are very angry people, mostly men. And what a lot of people don't know, because they're just looking at the anonymous comments, we could see for a while there, we could see the email addresses. They're often creating 4 and 5 identities for themselves, and they're agreeing with themselves online. So it can look like 80 people are commenting, and it's 8. You know, and oh, you were brilliant. I said, well, thank you. You were very smart, too. And we're looking at it and say, why can't we just tell the readers it's all the same person? He's talking to himself. So what's interesting about those comments is no matter what I write about, for example, there's a certain percentage of my hate mail that will be simply about my gender. That it's they resent that I have a column, they resent that I get paid to give my opinion, and you know how quickly they try to insult me? They call me fat, they call me ugly, they call me old, they call me a lesbian, which makes my lesbian friends really laugh. But they are very personal in their attacks. I would say that is an example right away of how I know and that we're still allowing it online, that I have to make an argument that there's something wrong with this, that we've created this climate for that. And when we run crime stories, we have to shut down the comments. If there's anything, if there is any issue of race in the crime, we have to shut them down because we know what we're going to get. And I would think women would care very deeply about that as well. So here's the thing. I imagine that a lot of the young women who feel that way perhaps have not been in the workforce very long yet. That will educate you like nothing. Or I look at also, you know, I guess what I'm increasingly becoming concerned about is how women treat women. There was a big, you know, the mommy blogs. Are you familiar with the mommy blog movement? A friend of mine, Jennifer Mendelsohn, wrote a piece for the New York Times recently about a mom blog conference. And they're very upset that they feel she was not taking them seriously. First of all, you want to be taken seriously, don't call it, what was it? Booty camp, I think, or something silly, and mommy blogs. You're kind of fueling that. But they went after her. The attacks were so personal that I've been interviewed twice now for stories that are coming up about how she was treated. And I know where that's coming from. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I know how insecure you can be. And then I was a full-time, out of the home. Every mom's a full-time working mother. But I was working for money outside the home, and I felt really guilty. I mean, I always felt insecure about it. And you know what helped me? Was a male friend, a fellow columnist who used to live across the street from me. And my daughter was still in elementary school, and I said, you know, Sam, I just feel so terrible. I hate when we have the time change because it gets dark so early, and I feel so bad that she's there, and I feel guilty that I have to have somebody taking care of her till I get home. And he said, I don't understand that, because if you weren't working, she'd starve. Such a matter-of-fact answer that really answered. So what I would like to see, first of all, is if women are telling other women you don't need to be concerned about this, I would like them to step back for a moment and think, so why does she care so much and I care so little? Well, that's not going to happen right now, right? So what is required of you is what was required of us. Patience, more patience, and the willingness to forgive them for doubting when they need you. I mean, that really is what distinguishes so many women activists in the long haul. So many activists, period, is they always think it's not going to involve them. It's not going to touch their lives. And then it does. And how you respond will make all the difference. But keep talking about it. I mean, I think it's clear I believe in talking anyway. But I'm a big believer in constantly talking about what matters to you and pointing out examples. You know, I remember when my daughter was young, one of the things I used to point out to her in television advertising is, why do you think they have that pretty woman next to that car when she's not even driving it? Why do you think that might be? So we could have that conversation and talk about why they would use that pretty woman that had nothing to do with the car, who had nothing to do with the car. And so you're constantly educating. That's the best you can do right now sometimes. Because here's what we know. There will be another opportunity. We will have more opportunities. What else? I have to look at the time here. I can't really see it. I don't want to hold you over. Okay, we're good. We have about 20 minutes, Chet. Over there?
Okay, I just have a question, I guess, but like I'm going into nursing school and kind of being a feminist, a lot of people ask me why I don't go for a more empowering job, such as a doctor or something like that, that mostly men overall have the most population, and I don't really know how to like explain to them that's what I want to do, but they want to know why I don't choose something higher that would... I
must be hanging out with the wrong people, because I can't imagine you telling me your dream is to become a nurse, and I immediately say, well, how come you're going to do that? Why aren't you going to be a doctor? But if they think that, you said that because the doctors have the power, have they ever been on a hospital ward? I mean, nurses are heroes. And nurses, one of the main reasons I think of nurses as heroic is they know the patients. I mean, as a reporter and as a columnist, how many stories have I seen? And many of them I've reported where it was the nurse that saved a life. The nurse that saw the drug interaction. The nurse that realized what was really wrong with the patient, or could talk to the doctor because the doctor wasn't listening or the doctor wasn't available. I have nothing against doctors. But to suggest to you that, here's the thing I guess I would say first and foremost. You don't have to defend what you're going to be. I have a friend, Karen Long, who taught me that one of the best ways, the best ways to respond when someone asks you a question that's not fair is just be silent and kind of look at them. And what I've done is added to that. When I get that, and I get some doozies sometimes, I just look at them and say, I'm trying to figure out why you think that's the appropriate question to ask me. Or just simply, I'm trying to figure out why you would ask me that kind of question. And it usually makes people pretty uncomfortable, because it should. Because I can't imagine somebody doing that to you. I'm sorry that's happening. But I don't think you have anything to be defensive about. And I do remember the day they had the Pulitzer Awards. I don't usually talk about them, but today has been one of those days where I have been. One of the editors of the biggest newspapers in the country came up to me during the cocktail hour, and he said, so, Connie, I'd never met him. What's all this? Because they thought their person was going to win, and I had won. He says, what's all this passion I keep hearing you have? And I said, well, Bill, if I have to tell you, I guess it's a little late for you. And I just walked away. Humor can work, Maybe you ought to come up with a couple lines. Make him feel silly. Because I didn't really need to explain to him that. And his question revealed far more about him than it did about me. Does that help at all? I'm just sorry that happened. Who's next? Okay?
I'd like to hear your thoughts on why you think Sarah Palin and Michele Bachmann's popularity is rising.
Because God has one hell of a sense of humor. You know what I think it does in part? These two women, they do not, they keep, well, how come feminists won't, they are not feminists in the way that I would define a feminist in terms of being supportive of other women. But what it does is it gives Republican men a chance to say, see, we got our women too, and look how you attack them. You're hypocrites. Well, Michele Bachmann, I don't even know where to start with her. Sarah Palin, I have very strong views on. I do not find her funny. I don't find her folksy or cute. I find her dangerous. Because I saw the hate she stirred up in the state of Ohio during the presidential race. And when she started talking about Barack Obama palling around with terrorists, his security increased. He had to have more, because you know what that was? That was like code to those lunatics, those citizen militia groups. And don't think for a moment that that did not occur to her. She just didn't care. I'm not saying she was trying to drum up violence. I'm saying she didn't care if she was. And the most racist posters I saw at any rally was her rally in Strongsville, Ohio. And it got national attention because of it. And when she started talking about death panels, when she absolutely knew there were no death panels. And so did Michele Bachmann, absolutely knew there were no death panels. But they knew that fear works. It's much easier to get people scared than to make them brave. It's much easier to make them fearful than to even make them trust. And so you get people scared, and all of a sudden, we've got metal detectors at my husband's healthcare forums in the summer at the town halls because he was getting death threats over health care. Over health care. I can't wait for the immigration vote. So I think they're popular because it allows women and men who've always wanted to be critical of feminists, who want to depict us as people, women who never shave, who secretly long for women but put up with men. It gives them a chance to say, but see, if you really believed in feminism, you would be supporting this woman. I was so insulted when they suggested immediately, and when Sarah Palin made the contrast herself, that, well, if you loved Hillary Clinton, get a load of me, is basically what she was saying. I'm sorry, no. But I saw the appeal. Do I think it was right to make fun of her intelligence? No, let's not call her stupid. I don't think we should make fun of people's grammar. I don't like how she gets folksy when she feels like it. I don't like that she tries that wink and, God speaks to her. Well, I'm sorry, I have a strong faith. How come God's not telling me to write on the palm of my hand? And I mean, everything she makes it up. Remember when she wrote on the palm of her hand and she decided, well, because it's in the Bible. Really? I get a little tired of that because what that does is it's an attempt to co-opt my Christian faith and to suggest that somehow I'm not a Christian because I don't agree with Sarah Palin. And, I was raised by a born-again Christian, my mother. She used to have a bumper sticker on her car, "My boss is a Jewish carpenter." And she would come visit me in very Jewish Shaker Heights, which made for interesting rounds to the grocery store. But she also said this, being a Christian means fixing yourself and helping others, not the other way around. Fixing yourself and helping others. I don't identify with the brand of Christianity that says I'm supposed to be going around fixing everybody else. But I also don't want to make fun of them for it. And I think that's where we really, I watch some of the left television, and I love Rachel Maddow. I've been on her show a number of times, and she really didn't do this to the same extreme as Keith Olbermann and certainly Chris Matthews, who will make fun of any woman. But I don't think it benefits us to just ridicule her. I think we should be talking about the dangers that her kind of speech pose for America. And I'm not worried about her anymore. I don't think, she's going to have a reality television show, I heard, right? So I can't imagine, although, who knows, maybe that's the route to the White House. I don't think so. And here's the other thing I know is so many moderate Republicans are mortified. And they're angry at McCain for picking her. That was a very cynical move on his part. But it's really muddied the waters, and it's made feminists very defensive. Again, I don't think we have anything to defend. I can easily distinguish between her and Hillary Clinton, for example. Yes, right here.
You seem very passionate and you speak about change. How does one go about translating that passion to actual progress in both journalism and activism?
Well, one of the things I've been talking about a lot lately is I say I'm an activist for journalism. Because I really do believe in journalism, and newspaper journalism in particular, not the newspaper you hold, but the traditions, the best practices of traditional journalism. And so I've been speaking around the country and writing a lot more about it. I was in South Bend yesterday in part to meet with the South Bend Tribune staff at the invitation of the editor to talk about why they matter still. Because you cannot have a thriving democracy if you do not have a thriving and free press. And there is no question in my mind about that. And the longer I'm married to a member of Congress, the more convinced I am of how important it is that we have people, reporters and real journalists keeping an eye on these people. And I mean that with no disrespect. I just mean there's so much power concentrated in so few people. And their staffs can get very full of themselves. And there are very good, dedicated people on the Hill, and there are people who have no business working there. And did you know that half the states in the country right now have not even a single reporter in Washington? Half. Think about that. Who is watching? And virtually none of them anymore at the Pentagon, the State Department, all the big departments that we used to cover. So my passion for that comes easily because I really do care about journalism. And I've seen the difference that journalism can make through my career and through the careers of so many I respect. activism itself, the thing I've always thought about activism is this. It comes in a moment you change. You watch something or you hear something and you think, oh, that can't be. And then you find out it is. You think, well, that's got to change. And you reach that point where you think, well, then I got to help make that change. I got to do something about that. It is a long road. And one of the things I often told my kids, because, it can be a scary thing to put yourself out there. I said, act brave and the courage will come. If you're waiting for that moment when you really finally feel really right and really brave, it may not ever come. My friend Jackie often describes me as somebody who throws her hat over the fence because I have to go after it then. I will make the stand and then I got to figure out how I'm going to keep talking about this and not get scared about it. But I like to tell the story of Sherrod in this respect. When Sherrod got elected in 1992, he was in the majority party for exactly 2 years. And then it was a very long dry spell. And during that time, especially in the build-up to the Iraq War, we had started dating right around that time. We used to joke that one of our things that we had in common, one of the things we'd love to do is compare ugly mail on Fridays, because we both were getting so much of it. But he was going to vote against the war, and I was writing against the war. And he was reading letters opposing the war in Iraq from constituents. And he just kept reading them, and they went to war anyway. And he kept reading the letters afterwards, because Ohio is 5th in the country in the number of people we've lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. So these wounds, they go deep in Ohio. And one night he said to me, he was just really tired. He was really tired. And he said, I don't know. They keep voting, the vote never goes the way. And I said, well, here's what I'm thinking. It is easy to inspire people when you are in the majority of any group. You all know you're in the minority here because you care about these issues so deeply. And so when you're in the majority, it's easy because you got the biggest megaphone. What really inspires people, though, is when you clearly do not and you won't give up. When it is clear that with all the obstacles you can see, you will not give up. And that's when it matters most. And some days, the best most of us can feel when we're really trying to break change is we get to answer that same question every morning. So who will I be today? Will I be the person who finally gave up? Or will I be the person who keeps fighting? And one of the things that keeps me going are the messages. It's the messages I get from women, usually when they're agreeing with me. But they call after hours because they don't want to talk to me in person. And it's clear to me from their message that they're leaving that they wrote it out and they're reading it because they were so scared. They were so nervous about actually leaving their opinion. And I think as long as there are women out there too afraid to speak their minds, I'm going to have to keep fighting. And it keeps me going. And sometimes that's the best I get. But it's really great because it's who I am in here. And it's we watched that music video earlier and about the idea of standing strong no matter what. And that's why it's so important to have gatherings like this, because you look around and you see you're not alone. I joked when we had the Robert F. Kennedy Awards, they call it the Poor People's Pulitzer. And I couldn't help but notice how tired we all looked. Because we were advocating for groups where we had to fight in the newsroom to get the stories in often. That was our first battle. And then our battle was to get the public to care about it. But we did it, and we were going to keep doing it. So you're not alone in here. And I think it's really important to have moments like this, events like this. I'm so grateful to you, both of you, that you're willing to do this in the name of your daughter, in the memory of your daughter, because it emboldens everyone in the room. I mean, if you're still standing, I'm not sitting. And if they're still standing, what does that say for us? I mean, I don't know about you, but I hear about Janet. I got no problems today. I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Over here?
When people start attacking you so personally, what keeps you going and how do you stay professional without sinking to their level?
Oh, you thought I stayed professional. No, I do. I try very hard to. I answered this question earlier. I was explaining my answer to this question. I get asked that, especially when I first started writing a column, and it sort of took everyone aback how quickly, the attacks were coming. And I used to answer that question in the wrong way, because there would almost always be a woman who would say, how do you stand it, and doesn't it bother you? And I thought I should say, nah, it doesn't bother me. I don't let it get to me. But, that wasn't true. And I realized that that couldn't possibly inspire anyone, because what a woman like that would say to herself, well, then I'm not like Connie, because it doesn't bother her and I can't speak up. And it wasn't true that it didn't bother me, especially when they attack my family. They attack our dog. She's a pug. I'm sorry. Her burden's heavy already. And they just make it very personal. So I decided that the right answer is the honest answer. Yeah, sometimes it really bothers me a lot, but I don't let it stop me. And one of the things that I think I figured out over time, and I have to thank Rush Limbaugh for this, because he's helped me figure this out. Every time they lose their temper and I don't, I win. Every time they're that screaming YouTube video and I'm not, I win. And what that means, sometimes that means you quite literally take a few deep breaths before you respond. You just step back and you think, all right, what do I want my kids to see on the internet? That's my measure. You ask what keeps me, more than anything else, it's what do I want to say I did? What answer do I want to have for my kids? And now my grandson, when he says, Grandma, what did you do when they were going to go to war? What did you do when they were talking about Barack Obama not being an American citizen? You know, all these different questions. I want to have the right answer. What did you do about women who are too scared to leave violent homes? What did you do about that? So that keeps me going. And we all have people we care about. We all have someone we want to have the right answer for, do we not? I mean, imagine somebody you really love turning to you and saying, well, what do you think of that? What did you do about that when you heard that happen? You don't want to be the one who said, I couldn't deal with it. So it's okay to be scared. I get scared a lot. I still get scared. I get nervous for interviews sometimes because I know I'm the last person they want to hear from. And I'm calling because I know I have to call. Or I get scared because I know I've written a column and it is going to be all over talk radio, and it's not the talk radio I usually listen to. And I know that's going to happen. But you know what? I just keep reminding myself of those women who write out their opinions to leave their messages. And I get up another day. I'm not saying it's always easy. I'm not saying I'm always professional. I probably shouldn't have said that to that man who said he's going to castrate himself. But sometimes you just got to have a little bit of fun with it too, and it keeps you going. And I have amazing friends, and then most of them are women. But I have some really strong male friendships too, who are there for me. And that is the key. Don't isolate yourself. You all know that, right? Don't ever isolate yourself in your activism. You have got to hang out with other people who support you. And especially to women, I say this. When I was going through my divorce in the early 90s, it was a horrible time. It was so hard. I had just started working at the Plain Dealer. My son was grown, but my daughter was home and little. And I was worried about being a good mom, a good employee, being a good daughter to my parents, a good friend still. And I was losing weight. I wasn't sleeping. I looked terrible. And one of my closest friends called me one night and says, I want to come over and talk to you when Caitlin's in bed. And so we sat down at our kitchen table, and I'll never forget this. She said, Connie, when you're on an airplane, and they're demonstrating how to use the oxygen, and they say, if you have a child who needs your help or someone who needs your assistance, what do they tell you to do? Put your own oxygen on first. One of my biggest concerns for you young people, your generation, is you are 24/7. You are constantly going. You are so bright. You are so engaged. You have all this technology. I worry that you're not giving yourselves downtime, because the only way you know who you are is when you have time to think. When you have time to sort it out, when you have time to listen to music or write some poetry or write down your thoughts in a journal or even just sit and talk with friends and laugh. I love what I learn about myself when I start relaxing and laughing. And have you ever had those moments where you've had a really tough few weeks and all of a sudden you're laughing so hard and you're thinking, I'm so glad I'm still laughing? You got to give yourself those moments because you're in for the long haul, right? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it's really important to keep that in mind. You've got to take care of yourselves. Does that help answer your question a bit? One more. We got time for one more. Do we have one more? Anybody? I feel like I should do like an auction. We got one more. Is that a hand? Or are you just fixing your hair? If there's a hand back there, I can't see it. Oh, there's a hand over there. This will be the last one.
I'm a nanny for 4 girls at home, and I hate watching television with them because I hate their role models. I hate watching the 2-year-old dance to Lady Gaga. It blows my mind.
So what would you say to women of my generation of how we could be better role models and find better role models for these younger girls?
What's your name?
Catherine.
Catherine. The first thing I hear about that is that these 4 very fortunate young girls have Catherine for a nanny. So you are already modeling for them, and because you have this concern about them. And I have a distinct impression, I'm feeling the energy here, you're not exactly keeping all your opinions to yourself when you're there. And one of the things that is so important to remember is in your role, you are already a role model. The only choice you have left is what kind of model will you be. So remember when I was talking about with Caitlin, some of the conversations we would have watching television and bringing it up? You can also decide that they're going to turn off the TV. Do you have that autonomy? Are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to? Yeah. So, okay, that's what I do. And show them, I mean, one of the greatest gifts we can give our children when they're young is, first of all, a love for books, a love for stories, a love for making up stories. One of the things we love to do, I have a married couple friend, they've been married for 20 years. One of the things they love to do, like they'll sit down in the theater waiting for the movie, and he'll turn to her and he'll say, "You come here often?" And she'll say, "Once in a while." And he'll make up a town. "I'm from Beaufort." She goes, "I'm from Hammond." And they just start talking. And so people sitting around them thinking they're just meeting each other, and then they kiss before the movie starts. I love that. I just love that. But the idea behind it is learning how to use your imagination. You know, our grandson is 2 years old. And it's at that age where, you know, we show up. He knows we're coming. And they open up the big door, and he's standing there, and his whole body is trembling. He's saying, "Grandma, Grandpa." And I turned to my husband, I said, "There is not another constituent in the state of Ohio that excited to see you." But I was reminded of the power of books when I saw him last, because I brought him the book, Harold and the Purple Crayon. You know that story where Harold keeps drawing and he keeps going? So Clayton is on my lap, and I said, we're like page 4 or 5, and I said, "Clayton, where do you think he's going to go next with that crayon?" And he says, "I don't know, Grandma. Torn the page! Torn the page!" And I was reminded all over again of the magic of reading. I mean, I still get that feeling when I read a good novel or when I read a good essay, you know. And so it sounds to me, Catherine, that you already know what you need to do. You just need permission. Permission granted.